Hi, this is the Peaceful Prepper. Today, I'd like to talk about gloves and how to protect our hands in everyday activities and in an emergency. This is a pretty straightforward topic, but I seem to be on a PPE kick or a personal protective equipment kick. So I want to give some thought to different types of gloves, their general uses, and how they can be useful in an emergency. Most of us already have gloves to protect our hands for activities that we do on a regular basis. But in an emergency, we may need to do things that we don't normally. And for many of us city dwellers, I think it's particularly helpful to identify some basic types of gloves because we may be less likely to already have them. If you live in a rental, you may not be responsible for home repairs. The owner or super may take care of things. We're also less likely to have gardens and yards, so we don't normally think about how to protect our hands for outside work. As usual, I'd like to start out by identifying some of the potential risks to our hands, why that risk may be greater in an emergency, and then think about what we need to have to help us deal with the risk. Again, this is pretty straightforward, but we want to protect our hands to prevent infection, cold temperatures, chemicals, fire and heat that can cause burning, abrasions, cuts, blisters, and general skin inflammation from any number of causes. In an emergency, I think protecting your hands is particularly important for a number of reasons. First, access to medical care may be limited, so prevention is really key. And any small cut, abrasion, any break in the skin barrier can increase chance of infection. Also, rashes, burns, irritations can inhibit both your ability to act and to do things with your hands, and also if you're in pain, you're not going to be as mentally alert and on top of things as you might otherwise be. And in addition to that, in an emergency, we may be doing things where we're more likely to hurt our hands. For instance, we're more likely to use fire or some kind of open flame for heating or cooking, so we're more likely to be burned. You may need to do home repairs in a difficult situation, for instance, boarding up a window during a storm. And some of the activities may just not be typical for you to do, having to move debris and broken glass, using chemicals for general cleanliness and disinfection, and handling various fuels. There are 4 basic categories that I want to focus on. Winter gloves, and they're pretty self-explanatory and may not be needed in your climate. They help prevent frostbite, hypothermia, and general discomfort from the cold. Medical gloves or exam gloves that many people already have in their first aid kits in order to prevent infection. And what are referred to as work gloves that cover a really wide range. These are the examples I have out here, and most are designed to prevent minor cuts, abrasions, blisters, burns, and there are some specialty types that I want to go over briefly as well. And finally, gloves that resist chemicals and help prevent irritation, inflammation, and chemical burns. I'm not going to try to cover all the options of work gloves, but just a few basics and then some specialty gloves that I think might be interesting to preppers. Work gloves include a wide range of materials and features: cotton, fabric, leather, dipped in nitrile. They have padding, reinforced areas, slip resistance, and of course they come in different sizes. Women particularly can have a hard time finding gloves that fit. Some brands make gloves specifically sized for women. Personally, I've found that women's gloves often don't fit my hand very well, but some men's gloves do. So if you plan on using gloves a lot, it's worth going someplace and actually trying them on to make sure they're comfortable and they fit. Even if they don't fit, work gloves can still be a big help, even if they're too big. You know, these are much larger than I need, but could still, oh, let me make sure I'm on camera. These are much larger than fit my hand, but can still be very useful in a range of situations. And they don't have to be expensive. I bought a 5-pack of these gloves on sale for about $3. And these, which are my main ones that really, they do fit me well. And they have protection for the knuckles, some padding, some texture that makes it more slip resistant, gives you a good hold, and even sort of a soft material here that's meant to help you wipe, that you can wipe your brow. So these gloves I think were $9 or $10. So even sort of, these are my quote good gloves, they still don't have to be very expensive, although you can get very high quality gloves for a lot more money if that's what you're looking for. There are also gloves named for certain sports or activities: flight gloves, mechanics gloves, shooting gloves, gardening gloves, etc. And they all have different features for that specific activity, but all of them can be used for a range of things. There are some specialty gloves that I think might be of particular interest in an emergency when you want to take every precaution. And with these gloves, you want to check that they meet ANSI standards, and ANSI is the American National Standards Institute. There are also comparable organizations in other countries, but ANSI is just the one that I'm familiar with. I'm just trying to provide a brief overview. If you decide to buy one of these more protective gloves, definitely check out how well it'll work for your activity. So welding gloves are an example of this. They provide high heat protection and are flame resistant. They're often leather with an aluminized lining and may contain either Nomex or Kevlar as well. In their description, they'll usually be rated up to a certain temperature. Electrician's gloves or voltage resistant gloves are usually rubber gloves with leather protectors over them, and they're rated from class 00 to class 4, each of which provides protection up to a certain voltage. Even if you wear voltage resistant gloves, it's still important to use every safety precaution when dealing with electricity, obviously. Then cut resistance gloves, and this is an example of a cut resistant glove, provide some protection from cuts from non-powered blades. They're not designed to protect you from equipment like a power saw. They're often made from a metal mesh or other material with similar strength. And they're rated from level 0 to level 5. These I bought when I was planning on buying a mandolin, the kitchen slicer, not the musical instrument. And mandolins, in my opinion, are the kitchen appliance which are most likely to chop off your finger. So I wanted to look for some extra protection before I started using it. And these are also not puncture resistant. This is a woven sort of metal and other fabric. If to make them puncture resistant, and there are gloves that are puncture resistant, there'd have to be some other kind of material on top of the woven material. And these, I bought these quite a few years ago, but I think they were $10 or $12, something like that. These are exam gloves that most of you probably already have somewhere in a first aid kit. They help prevent the spread of infection, obviously. Latex and nitrile are the most common materials. Latex used to be the norm, but they've found a lot of people with latex allergies, so nitrile gloves have become the standard. And some are, I think these are an example of that. Some are textured at the fingertips. I don't think you can actually see that on camera, but that give you some better control and slip resistance. They also come in different sizes, and if you search around, you can find some with different cuff lengths, with a longer cuff or thicker gloves. And thicker gloves will increase your protection but decrease your sensitivity and dexterity. And like most gloves, it's great to get ones that fit, but if it's too large, it still offers protection. If it's too small, obviously, it won't work. So if you don't need a large or an extra large glove, for instance, these that I have here are, they call it a universal size, but I think it's more a medium large. Someone with much bigger hands wouldn't be able to wear these comfortably. So I think it's well worth considering having some large or extra large gloves on hand because you don't know exactly who will need to use them. I'm not going into infection control very much, but the prepper nurse, skinny medic, both have a lot of information about infection control on their channels. I also wanted to mention Snowbound. She has a new small channel and is doing a series on infection control and working with patients in isolation and setting isolation up at home. I think she's a nurse or works in a hospital. I'm sorry, Snowbound, I've forgotten exactly what your background is. But she just posted a long video with lots and lots of suggestions about supplies that could be helpful in that situation and tips on how to use them. So I'll link the video below. I've never really thought of them this way, but the rubber gloves you may very well have under your kitchen sink or in a cleaning bucket are an example of chemically resistant gloves. The key factors determining protection for these gloves are the type of material and the thickness of the glove. You can tell these are much thicker than the medical gloves. I think you can tell, although these are both made from nitrile. So common materials for chemically resistant gloves are nitrile, like this and the medical gloves, latex, which is just natural rubber, and butyl, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, B-U-T-Y-L, or neoprene, which are both synthetic rubbers. And different materials are most effective with specific chemicals. So if you want to protect yourself against a specific substance, I've included links in the info box to a chart from the U.S. Department of Energy that lists a lot of specific chemicals and the best material for that chemical. But most of us probably just want general protection. And in that case, the nitrile or the neoprene, from what I read, seemed to be the common choice. These, again, are nitrile gloves. I don't even know the brand, but I just picked them up in the grocery store. It's what I had under my kitchen sink. And they cover the wrist and the beginning of the forearms. And they also have the textured fingers for control and dexterity, but you can see with the thicker glove, and it's not as thick, you have much more control with the medical, with the thin nitrile gloves than the larger ones. There are also gloves, again, that they come in a variety of sizes, but also lengths. So you can find gloves that cover all the way up to past your elbow if you want that kind of protection. If you don't use any rubber gloves normally, it may be worth thinking about getting some for an emergency when you may be more likely to be dealing with cleaning chemicals and fuels. I use sort of natural cleaners that I often make rather than chemical cleaners normally, but in an emergency, I think I'm going to be more likely to use bleach or another cleaner to disinfect more thoroughly. So I want to have these on hand. And even with natural substances, your hands can get irritated and red, and you really want to avoid that in an emergency. So you can buy gloves like this. Some are designed, you can find them that are described specifically as chemically resistant gloves. You can pick these kinds of things up in the drugstore, grocery store, anything like that. You can also get boxes of disposable gloves that are chemically resistant. Not much needs to be said about winter gloves. There's one feature that I thought I'd mention. Some gloves now have a special material, and I don't have these gloves, but I've seen them, have a special material on the fingertip that lets you swipe a smartphone without taking your gloves off. And winter gloves can also do double duty as work gloves if you don't need heavy duty work gloves, and it's not only an occasional need. This is a pair that last year I used when I had to clear some branches off a road to drive through and hadn't set up my car kit, so I didn't have any work gloves in my car. And they do have some reinforcement on the palm and the fingers. So they held up okay, but I don't know whether you can see it, but they're really scratched up. They certainly aren't the kind of gloves that I'd want to use regularly to do that. But what I'm doing with these now, I'm keeping these gloves in my bug out bag or 72-hour kit, so they can, for a short period of time, they can certainly double up as work gloves or winter gloves, so I don't need to have two pairs. In addition to gloves, there are other ways to help protect your hands. First, which I think most people are very familiar with, is thorough and frequent hand washing, which really helps with infection control. And I don't have a picture of soap here, but I think everyone knows what that is. Keeping your nails trimmed, having some good nail clippers to help keep the nails trimmed, helps to keep your hands clean. They're easier to clean. It can, if you have little hangnails that can create little cuts, it can also help with infection control and moisturizing. Just having some kind of moisturizer to keep skin from cracking, especially around the cuticles and the knuckles. Some people don't experience that, but if you have dry skin, you can get really dry, cracking skins, and anything that breaks the skin barrier can increase your chance of infection. One thing that I usually do when my skin is really dry is, instead of looking for some kind of special cream, I just use the same cream I would use and I add some oil. This is castor oil, which is a nice thick oil, but anything would help. You can just go into the kitchen and grab whatever oil's there, olive oil, sunflower oil, whatever it is, add it to the cream, and it really increases its moisturizing. Or use the oil straight. In the winter, when my skin gets really dry and my cuticles tend to crack, which again, you don't want any little open cuts on your skin, I'll just put the oil on directly to protect it. And then if you do have a minor injury, or even a larger one, but just some kind of cut or burn, having a well-stocked first aid kit just in the home for everyday life and an emergency, so you can deal with things as they come up, having bandages, some antibiotic ointment, some pain medication, maybe some pain cream or spray like lidocaine. And it can also be very useful to have an aloe plant for burns, but also it moisturizes. I've found it helpful when my skin is a little bit red or seems a little bit irritated, that aloe vera can really be helpful for that. So you can buy aloe vera, or you can have a fresh plant, which is probably even more, the fresh aloe vera is probably even more effective. My hand protection plan for everyday and emergencies includes some of all 4 categories of gloves that I've talked about. Medical gloves, I have a box of nitrile gloves in a medium size that fit me, and I'm going to get a box of nitrile gloves in an extra large size for other people. I have quite a few pairs of winter gloves and keep extras in my car during the winter. Chemically resistant gloves, I'm going to stock up on more reusable nitrile cleaning gloves and maybe a box of large or extra large disposable nitrile gloves for chemicals with long cuffs that are thicker than the medical gloves. And work gloves, I have a few at home and keep 2 in my car, including some that are extra large so anyone can use them. I'd love to hear about your plans for hand protection in an emergency, what your favorite gloves are, and what do you stock. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Be safe, be happy.